Noswaith dda pawb, Fienwi Bev Lewis. My name is Bev Lewis, and I'm the Invasive Non-Native Species Coordinator here at the Brecon Beacons National Park. And one half of the Invasive Species team, the other half is David German. And we started looking at the Invasive Species Project in 2018, and David came along in 2019. So as Ben said, I'll go through the talk, and if we could have questions at the end, unless there's anything you find unclear in the middle of the presentation, you can put in a chat box, and Ben will diligently go through them all at the end. So I suppose we start with the very, very basics. What is a native species? A native species originated and developed here, and it's adapted to living. So in terms of the GB, it's one that was present at the end of the last glacial period before the English Channel was formed and the island was cut off, as it were. A non-native species, there are lots of them in the British Isles. Some of them have been somewhat naturalised, such as things like sweet chestnut, but they're all things that were transported to a new environment with human assistance. So at the moment, there's, and I got this figure recently, there are 3,224 non-native species in Britain. However, the general figure is that only 10 to 15% of non-native species go on to become invasive non-native species, and that's the big difference. Is that an invasive non-native species is an animal or plant that causes damage to biodiversity, to the environment, to our health, or the economy, etc. So in Great Britain, there are actually at the moment recorded 193 invasive non-native species that currently have a negative impact on the way we live. And then you can see along the bottom some of the culprits. We've got grey squirrel, Australian swamp stonecrop, Rhododendron ponticum, bamboo, and signal crayfish. So why are they a problem? Well, they can cause problems in many different ways. We have things like transmission of disease. For example, the grey squirrel is a carrier of squirrel pox. It doesn't suffer from it particularly, but it can spread it to our red squirrels, which unfortunately do suffer 100% mortality from it. And then signal crayfish carry crayfish plague, which again affect our white-clawed crayfish. They can cause problems through competition. For example, the harlequin ladybird, which is out competing our native ladybirds. They can cause problems through predation, such as mink on water voles. Some of the invasive plants can cause problems with our waterways by invading them and becoming a monoculture and blocking up drainage ditches, etc. Some plant species can cause infrastructure damage, such as buddleia and Japanese knotweed. Some species cause human health risks, such as the oak processionary moth, which has very fine little hairs that can irritate the skin and the breathing of the humans. They can cause problems through hybridization, such as the ruddy duck, which hybridized with the white-headed duck, which is obviously a lot rarer, and many, many other case studies I could give you. But suffice to say, we have quite a few invasive species in here, and we spend £1.7 billion on controlling them every single year. A lot of that is agriculture and horticulture. The impact of invasive species generally is now so significant that they're second on the list after habitat loss and damage, and this is particularly important in terms of islands where the whole flora and fauna has evolved to be very specific to that island. And I think I've already given you the facts about how many species there are. How do they get here? So invasive species rely on human movements. particularly so in the last 50 or so years, given the massive increase in globalization, the rise in the air and sea transport of goods, and a big increase in travel. Species can come in through things like marine ballast water, which is brought from one destination and released at the other, shipping movements. So you can get small animals that will attach themselves to boats, and then they'll be moved to another port. You can get stowaways, so you can get things like rats that stow away on ships, and then horticultural imports and contamination. So hitchhikers on plants that can come in, and when they're in the UK, then they can be moved around by things like kayaks, fishing gear, soil movements, vehicle movements, things moving from site to site, and then of course livestock movements and people movements generally. So there's lots of ways they can get in here and lots of ways they can be moved around. Okay, so this is just a general look about the Brecon Beacons National Park specifically. And we have currently 58 of the 193 invasive non-native species here in the Brecon Beacons National Park. Obviously, we don't have a coastline, so we don't get the marine species, thankfully, which is why I think our number is fairly low. In the Record Centre database, we have 4,842 records in total, and the oldest record is a Canada goose. As you can see, this is just the top 10 by the number of records. We've got 1 bird, 2 mammals, and 7 plants. And I think this just goes to show how recorder effort can show up in the data, because I think, generally speaking, Canada goose is at the top because birds are very well recorded generally. Plants are pretty good as well. And then mammals, there's a few snuck in there as well. So I think Canada goose is at the top because we do a lot of bird recording, and we also have annual recording at Langorse Lake when they round up the Canada geese and ring them. So I think that's probably why we have a lot of biological records. And oh yeah, just to say that although Ben said in the beginning we only had a few Himalayan balsam records, it just goes to show that in a good year, which is 2019, we managed to add at least 600 more INS records to the database. And even last year, during COVID year, we still managed to add 337 records to the database. And here is a map produced showing where invasive non-native species have been found in the national park over the last 10 years. And I'll just, is someone not muted? Ben, would you be able to mute them?
Yeah, I'll
Thank you. So as you can see, it's not the best clarity of map, unfortunately, but you can see, I don't know if I can use my cursor to show you, that the main concentration is down this Usk Valley River catchment here, and that's 2 reasons. I think it's the biggest river in the park, and it's also where most people live, as Ben talked about earlier. Invasive species tend to be found where more people live, and they also tend to get more records where more people live. So yes, we've got a very clear demarcation of the River Usk catchment, and then also some of the other catchments such as the Toway, and then the A470 and the Beacons reservoirs down here, with a few dots up here in the settlements such as Hay, Steny Bridge, and Abergavenny down here. So that's just to give you a general flavour of where the in species are in the national park. I haven't put for the last, I've only put for the last 10 years, otherwise the map gets a bit crowded. So why is it really important? Why does the Brecon Beacons National Park think it's really important to do INS control here? And I put this map up to show you just how many catchments originate in the national park. I think the last count was 21 river catchments, and we've got 23 drinking water sources. So when you've got something like Himalayan balsam or fragments of Japanese knotweed, which are very light and are easily spread by water, you can see that why it's so important to be starting INS control at the top of a catchment. There isn't a lot of point of starting INS control in the middle of a catchment when you know that you're going to get reinfestations from sources of invasive species upstream. That's a good principle for plants. For animals, you might have to tweak it a little bit, but certainly that's why we think the national park is such a good place to start INS control. So what are your 58 species? Mostly plants. I couldn't obviously fit all 39 species on the page, so those are just a few of the bad boys I'd like to highlight to you, and I'll be talking about a few of them in a minute. You've got 4 invertebrates, the harlequin ladybird. That's a fairly recent introduction to Britain as a whole. Crayfish, Jenkins spire snail, and the Crangonyx pseudogracilis is some kind of very small, I can't remember what it was called now, macropod or something like that. There's only one record for, I think. Birds, as we mentioned before, birds are, quite well recorded. So we've got our cans of geese records. I know we've certainly got a mandarin duck living at Langorse Lake. He's very sweet. Ruddy duck have been recorded in the past, although they've been through an elimination program now. And I think there was an eagle owl spotted. I think he may have been an accidental release. So whether he's still alive, I don't know. Mammals. We've got 3 species. The American mink, which has been devastating for our populations of native water voles. We've got the grey squirrel, which again has been devastating for our populations of our native red squirrels. And we've got Chinese muntjac deer moving into the park, and these have mostly been recorded in the east of the park, probably moving up from places like Gloucestershire and the Forest of Dean. Fish species, I can't say I know a whole lot about, but the goldfish was recorded in 2007. In terms of reptile and amphibian, the red-eared terrapin, I know there was a craze for terrapins in the 80s and subsequent abandonment of them as pets once they got too big or didn't want to be kept in them anymore. Some of them survived, but I don't think our cold and wet winters would be very conducive. So that's only one record for a terrapin in 2013. And so let's start with some of the plant offenders. And the first one is probably very familiar to anyone who walks by a riverside, and that's Himalayan balsam. This was introduced by the Victorians as an ornamental plant and either escaped or was helped out of, helped into the wild by people. And it's an annual plant, so it lives by producing large amounts of seeds every year, and then the plant dies back and the seeds grow on the year after. So you recognize it through, I think the bottom right hand corner is what it looks like about now, which is this small plant here amongst grasses, but you can see it's getting quite dominant already. And then it has finely serrated leaves, and it's got even when it's this small, it has a slight pinkish midrib here until it grows up. And then when it flowers, it's generally pink flowers. Sometimes it can be white. It gets very tall. It can go up to 2 meters. I certainly walked through towers of it. And it forms a monoculture. It grows much faster than most of our native, well, all of our native wildflower that would naturally grow by rivers. And it outcompetes our native plants, and it actually produces, has been known, up to 800 seeds per plant. And you can see the seed capsules here in the top right hand picture, and it's a clever plant because those seed capsules, if you accidentally touch them, will explode open and throw their seed out up to, I think it's 7 meters. So they produce each plant produces 800 seeds and can throw it 7 meters. So you can see why it can form this monoculture so quickly and spread so easily. One of the main issues, apart from outcompeting our native wildlife, is that because it forms this monoculture that dies back in winter, it leaves bare soil. So when we get winter flooding, we can get soil erosion and the bank can be washed away because it's not being stabilized by some of our more regular flora and grasses, etc. Okay, I'm afraid my map isn't as up to date as Ben's, but I just wanted to say that when we first started the project, we had 210 records of Himalayan balsam, and we're now up to 717. I can't remember what Ben's exact figure was. I think it was even more. And we're starting to discover it in new places that it wasn't recorded in before, such as the Towie Valley down here. So we need to, it's really important that we nip these new places in the bud before they become this much bigger task that is the Usk River catchment. And the way we're tackling Himalayan balsam in the national park is we're focusing on 2 river catchments, the Usk River catchment and the much smaller Towie River catchment. And we're working to find the seed sources on both catchments. We think we've got it nailed on the Towie Valley, and then in the Usk Valley we've got it narrowed down to just west of Brecon. So what the plan of action is to start tackling Himalayan balsam at the source and work our way down the catchment, as it were. So there isn't a lot of point in starting down here because you'd only get reinfested from further upstream. So we're working with partnerships with organisations and community groups to deal with that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the talk. This is known as the Pavement Eater. It's been known under various headlines as what's the word, mortgage nightmare. And again, it's an extremely fast growing plant. It actually can grow on Japanese lava fields. It's one of the first colonizers, so that will give you an idea of how tough this plant is and how quickly it can grow. It has these zigzag stems with green coloured leaves, and it has red speckled stems. Looks a bit like bamboo when it grows tall, and in the summer when it flowers it has these long racemes of very small white flowers. And if you, I don't recommend it, but if you do have enough disturbance around the roots, you can see that they're white shoots. And here's where Japanese knotweed exists in the park. Again, started out with 334 records. We've now got 695, a lot of it in the Usk catchment because that's where we've done a lot of the surveys, but you know, quite a few of it elsewhere in the national park. And Japanese knotweed doesn't reproduce by seeds. We're fortunate that it actually only produces sterile seeds. That's probably because it was introduced from one plant by the Victorians. And it actually spreads by its rhizomes, its underground roots, and it can spread from the very, very, very tiniest of fragments. So that's why you've got to be really careful if you're ever doing work anywhere near Japanese knotweed, because you just do not want to be touching it at all, apart from if you're professional controlling it. And the other thing is to watch out for hybrids, because it can hybridize with two of the other knotweeds, the giant knotweed, and form a it can form a hybrid, which then there's a risk of it producing sterile, non-sterile seeds, which would be a bit of a nightmare. Our third one is giant hogweed. We do have a native hogweed that this plant isn't to be confused with. I suppose it's a bit like normal hogweed, but on steroids. You can see the height, can grow up to 5 meters. People say it's absolutely unmistakable once you see it because of the size of it. It has these very, very large flower heads, which are dinner plate size, so it's much bigger than our native hogweed, and it has these sort of pinky purpley stems, blotchy, and they're very sharp and bristly. And hogweed isn't annual, giant hogweed isn't annual, and it can produce up to 50,000 seeds per plant, and that seed can live for 15 years. So this is why invasive species tackling invasive species is a long-term project. You can't just dip in and out. You have to be in it for the long haul, really. Those are the records within the national park. I was pleasantly surprised when I came into the post to find that it had mostly been eliminated from within the national park. The Wyanask Foundation, the National Park, and Natural Resources Wales had been running a project for many years to control giant hogweed where it occurred, and it was mostly eliminated. We do find the occasional plant pops its head up, because as I've just said, you know, the seed can live for 15 years, but generally speaking, we don't have this one anymore. But I've put it up there because I want people to be on the lookout for it should they come across it. Our native hogweed also grows tall, but it doesn't grow quite as tall as 5 meters. And the nasty thing about giant hogweed is you don't want to get any of its sap on your skin, because its sap is phytotoxic. So it means if you get the sap on your skin and then you get sunlight on your skin, then it will react and it can form very nasty burns and blisters, which can persist for years. So that's a really good reason for controlling giant hogweed. Our native hogweed, same family, does also have sap that you don't want on your skin, but it's nowhere near the level of nastiness of giant hogweed. Right, rhododendron. This is one to be aware of, because I'm sure most of you will have seen what it looks like in Snowdonia National Park, where it's got out of hand over there. This was a horticulture escape, and then it was also planted for game cover. Came into the country 1893, and the problem with rhododendron is, like many of these invasive species, is it outcompetes our native wildlife. It produces these very large bushes, and recently we've also found that it can be a host to Phytophthora, which is a tree disease that's been devastating for larch and other trees. All parts of rhododendron are poisonous to humans and livestock. It spreads by suckers and by seeds, and the seed capsule will persist for 3 years, so it's quite a tough old plant. One study even found that its it was toxic to honeybees when they tried to take the nectar. It also affects the soil. It produces a toxin underneath it, and the leaf litter produces a toxin which stops other plants growing. So it's a clever plant, but it's not one we particularly want to encourage. One of the places that we've been removing it off on this left-hand photo is off Cribarth, which is a scheduled ancient monument in the southwest of the park. And these bushes had been were in a very difficult position and had been left to grow. So about 2 years ago, we started to tackle it, and we've taken out all the main flowering stems, and now we're just dealing with very small regrowth. And recently, it's been good to see that the Trunk Roads Agency have also been dealing with the rhododendron along the A470 as you go down towards Merthyr from Brecon. And I should say, you recognise rhododendron through it's got these quite very dark green leaves. It's not got any teeth on the leaves, unlike cherry laurel. The leaves are arranged alternately around the stem, ending in a spiral, and it has pink flowers in summer. Okay, as I've just said, cherry laurel, that's one that you know might confuse rhododendron with, but this plant has much more leathery leaves. It has, I don't know if you can see very well, it has tiny teeth on the edge. The leaves are a bit more shiny, and it produces these white flowers in a raceme, a candle-like spike. Again, it was an escape from horticulture, 1886. This one spreads through suckers and seeds. It's also quite commonly planted in urban parks and gardens, etc. And again, it shades out our native vegetation. All parts of laurel are poisonous, but in very small quantities. Okay, the next one, an aquatic plant, Australian swamp stonecrop, Creesula Helms Eye. It's also been sold as Tilia recurva and Tilia aquatica. Not allowed to be sold now in garden centres. And this only came in 1956 and was probably a result of a garden pond throwout. And it's a particularly invasive plant. I don't know if you can see, it forms this green carpet. This was an open water body that was, you know, quite interesting for wildlife. But what it does, again, it forms a dense monoculture. It shades out any other species that's trying to grow there. And the clever thing about Creesula Helms Eye, it can have 3 forms. It can be long and stringy, and when it's submergent in the water. It can be like this when it's emergent, and then when it comes, it can actually grow on terrestrial land. So if you've got a slightly damp ditch near the pond, which we do have, it's kind of creeping out as well. So it's a very successful plant. It can be confused with our native water starwort. So just to be careful, you probably need to look at the tips of it with a hand lens, because our native water starworts have a notch on the end. And not as though it's a particular tourist attraction, but if you want to see Creesula Helms Eye, this is Manathelted near the National Park Visitor Centre, which we're hoping to treat later on in the year. Okay. And if you want to see a pond where it's really got hold of, I don't know if anyone who's local is familiar with Brecon Beacons Eye, where they've been trying various treatments up there, and it doesn't look very successful, and it's a sorry sight to see, and we don't want to see any more of that in the park if we can help it. Catoniaster species, there's quite a few of these. They were introduced in the 1800s. Again, I'm afraid it's competition and shading out that is the main problem here. These were you'll see them in lots of places, you know, car parks, etc. They're very popular with landscapers, and the birds do like the berries. And where they become a problem is things like coastal sites, and for us in particular, on our limestone pavement, where they can, you know, outcompete our native vegetation quite significantly. I think this shot was taken at Hogweed, the National Nature Reserve up near Creesula National Creesula Visitor Centre and Pennakai. Again, yeah, another escape from horticulture. A lot of these invasive plants are escapes from horticulture. Spanish bluebell, that's one that's very current at the moment. Our native bluebell woods are flowering. You can differentiate between Spanish bluebell and our native bluebell. Our native bluebell has very delicate flowers, more delicate plants, more thinner leaves, and it droops to one side, whereas the Spanish bluebell is a much more upright plant with more broader leaves, and the flowers occur around the stem. Unfortunately, Spanish bluebell does hybridize with our native bluebell, and it outcompetes it physically as well. So again, that's a problem because Britain is a stronghold for our native bluebells. So please don't ever let Spanish bluebell escape from your garden if you have it. Another one to watch out for is Montbretier crocosmia. That's a plant which seems to grow very successfully from corms. I mean, fortunately, we don't have any large areas like this that I'm aware of, which is a photo from Snowdonia National Park. But I think it is on the increase as a garden throwout. I've been talking to colleagues from Wildlife Trust South and West Wales who say they've found it dumped on their woodland nature reserve near Talbot, and now they've got to get their volunteers to dig it out. So again, make use of the green bins if you live in Paris, please. Other plant species include one I mentioned earlier, giant knotweed, which is just a much bigger version of Japanese knotweed. It's hard to give you the scale of it, but you know, that's quite a large yard, and it grows very tall and very thick. And like I said, we have to keep giant knotweed away from Japanese knotweed in case it forms a hybrid and produces sterile seeds, and then we'd have a huge problem on our hand. And the other knotweed on the right is Himalayan knotweed. That's a photo taken, I think, just west of Brecon, and that's another one that if we see it, we try and control it. Potential future problems. I go to the Property Care Association conference on invasive species, where they have a mixture of ecological consultants, builders and professionals in the building trade who talk about invasive species. And one of the things they talk about is what are the up and coming problems. And two of the highlighted ones here were bamboo and buddleia. As you can see, the buddleia growing out of the wall there. The buddleia davidi, I should say, has potential to cause problems with brickwork, pavement, foundations, etc. Its root system is very strong. And then the other one, which is up and coming, I think probably because it's very fashionable at the moment to have bamboo. Bamboo, there are very many species, and you can only really identify them to species or even when they flower, and they don't flower very much in this country because our climate is not right for it. And there's two main groups of bamboo, the runners versus the clumpers, and the ones that cause the most invasive problems are the runners. So they can have root rhizomes that travel 7 meters underground. So I'm on a lot of gardening forums, and this is one I see quite often as a neighbourly dispute issue. So I do wonder whether this one could be one to watch for the future. And just a warning to all, if you're ever tempted to buy bamboo, please buy a clumper rather than a runner, because it does pretty much what it says on the tin, and try and put it in a pot, because these things can get away from you. And the picture on the right, Himalayan honeysuckle. I've had a few queries about this. This was another horticultural escape from 1959. Again, it outcompetes our native wildlife and forms big thickets. And just for a change, where there are some mammals and some insects on this one as well. So what could possibly come in the future? Now, I have mentioned oak processionary moth before. You can see just how hairy that is. Oak processionary moth, those hairs will make you itch, they can give you rashes, they can cause breathing difficulties, and maybe even an allergic reaction. So it's not something that you want in this country, preferably. I have a lovely story of a gentleman who was in France, holidaying in France, and he saw a procession, because they do go in a procession, of caterpillars trying to cross the road, and he was worried they got run over. So he picked them up with his bare hands, carried them in his hat and put them all the other side, and then put his hat back on, and then ended up in hospital with severe reaction. So oak processionary moth is not something we want in this country. I think you may have seen it in the news over the last, I think it was a year or two, when it was imported accidentally onto, I think it was oak trees that were being planted in Roath Park, Cardiff. So it's a human health hazard, so it's one to watch out for. And really, you shouldn't really touch any hairy caterpillars, because they can all be a bit itchy. Another future invader, we've had raccoon dogs, whether they're accidentally released or escaped in Carmarthenshire. Two of them escaped in 2019 near Pimsite and were never recovered, to the best of my knowledge. And last year there was another raccoon dog escaped, and unfortunately that was captured and destroyed. So again, escape from the pet trade, that's another possible pathway for invasive species spread. On the bottom, we've got an Asian hornet, and this came to France in 2004 in a consignment of clay pots, and from there it spread across Europe, and it is a predator of our native honeybees. It's something we really don't want. It was first found in Gloucestershire in 2016, and since then there have been 14 confirmed sites, and this is a species that is an alert species. So if this gets recorded, there is a crack team that comes in and will try and track back the nest and destroy it, because we're at the stage now where we can keep it out of Britain if we are constantly monitoring and being on the lookout for it. Last year there was only one nest recorded in Hampshire that was destroyed. So fingers crossed that one isn't going to make its home here. And then on the right, we have a plant which is so distinctive, it'd be quite easy to look out for. It's the American skunk cabbage. I'm afraid the photos shrank it a bit. It's not quite as squished as that. It's a very big plant, and it smells, and it has these yellow flowers. It's not unattractive looking, but it again will outcompete our native plants and cause problems. So we want to keep that one out of the national park if possible. That photo was actually taken from an ornamental garden in Powys Castle in Montgomeryshire. So who decides what's going to be our future threats? Well, there's a group of experts called the Wales Biodiversity Partnership Invasive Species Group, and they are experts from Natural Resources Wales, from national parks, from councils, from horticulture, from fishing industries, and they get together to decide and work out what is going to be coming over the horizon at us. And I'll read out the definitions of what each of these categories is. Prevention priority species. So these are species that are not in Wales, but are likely to arrive. As you can see, Asian hornets on there. And a rapid response is needed if they do. So those are the sort of the top tier, as it were. Then we've got 11 management priority species. So these are species that are present or recently present in low numbers or in limited isolated populations. And to prevent widespread establishment, eradication is required, feasible and desirable. And thirdly, we have 18 long-term management priority species, which is mostly what I've been talking about tonight with the cherry laurel, Catoniaster and the balsam and the knotweed, etc. And those are species where control is feasible and beneficial. So that gives you an idea of what to look out for. And I can send a link to that at the end if anyone wants it. So what can you do? As ever, biosecurity prevention is better than the cure. If we'd known everything we know now, we wouldn't have introduced all these ornamentals and accidentally released all the other, you know, the mink and the grey squirrels, etc. So what we need to do now is not make it any worse. We need to not bring any new species in, and we need to not spread any species that are already here. And everyone can do a bit of this. And there are national campaigns such as the Check, Clean, Dry campaign, which is mostly aimed at the aquatic industry, so fishing, boating, kayaking, etc. Although it's suitable for anyone who goes in the water, really. So it's pretty much as it says on the tin. Check your equipment, check your clothes before you go, clean everything off, and dry everything out for as long as possible, because drying is one of the key ways to kill off some of these species. And even if you don't know wins are there, it's always a good idea to brush your boots off, to wipe excess mud off and not take it onto another site elsewhere. And I was told a story of someone who did went on a balsam bash and wore the same boots in their garden, and lo and behold, the next year Himalayan balsam popped up in her garden. So you've got to be really careful not to track any bits of plants or seeds home with you. Okay. So one of the other campaigns that's going on is a citizen science project called Plant Alert. And as I've mentioned, a lot of these invasive species have come from the ornamental trade or escaped over the wall. So this is like a horizon scanning project to see what's causing a problem in your gardens now that, if it got out, might also cause a problem to our wildlife, to our environment. So what it's asking gardeners to do is asking what is becoming invasive or difficult to control in your garden. And you can record this online, and I've managed to get the table of what's the most frequently recorded problem plants in a garden. A lot of them we've talked about tonight, like the knotweed and the balsam and the Himalayan honeysuckle. But there's quite a long list of things that you know, perhaps we haven't really considered, such as that geranium down there, So it gives an idea of what to look out for, and it's a really nice way of getting into recording if you just start in your own garden with anything that's causing a problem. I was going to say that there's a talk on Thursday the 27th this week from the people who have created this plant alert on wildlife friendly gardening with non-invasive plants. The link is in the chat box, and I can put it in again at the end if anyone's further interested. So recording, I think Ben's probably already covered this pretty well. I'll just say that we endorse using the Alert Wales app as an INS team. We found it much more useful than trying to fiddle about with bits of paper and GPSs in the field. The advantage of the Alert Wales app is your phone automatically downloads a grid reference, and you have the option to take a photograph of the species so that it's much quicker and easier for the county recorder to verify your recording. And I think it also provides a good reminder as well. So I won't go into that because Ben's already spoken a lot about that. Oh, I would just say, when you're in the field, you can just record something as plant and then go back home, get it identified, and retype the name in as the species. That's another good advantage of using that app. If you want to know more, or you want some digital resources, this website here, the GB Non-Native Species Secretariat, is the sort of go-to website. It has news and events, has species alerts of things to look out for. It has some great species information sheets, identification guides, and what's really helpful is this training tab here, which does open in a separate window, and I've put the link in the chat box. You can actually do some online e-learning about invasive species, so if you want to know a bit more, or to test yourself or push yourself on a bit, that's really quite useful. And the local action group pages, if you're not local to the national park but you are wanting to know what's in your area, that's a really good resource as well. And then if you want to have specific guidance for Wales, I would go to the Welsh Government website, and it's called Harmful Injurious Weeds and Invasive Non-Native Species. And the ones I would highlight to you would be Himalayan balsam and Japanese knotweed. They've just redone the information on Japanese knotweed control now to make it much more scientific and more useful and more up to date. So I do recommend having a look if that's your bag. If you don't like digital, you can have lovely books. The field guide, that's only published last couple of years. That's really helpful. That's probably my go-to Bible for identifying INS. This is an FSC fold-out laminated guide that you can shove quickly in your rucksack. That's only about $2.99 or something like that. And this is the Property Care Association book on controlling it. So this is probably more aimed towards the professional side, but I think it makes quite interesting reading. So yeah, I do recommend this book is pretty good. So do you want to get involved if you live in the Brecon Beacons National Park, or you just want to know a little bit more? So back in 2018, we started a pilot project called Invaders of the National Park. Please don't blame me for the title. And it was a project which aimed to work in partnership with other organisations, with community groups and with volunteers, because two people trying to control INS across the national park was never going to work. We always needed to be working in partnership, and we always thought it would be more sustainable and a better way of working. We really wanted to impart the fact that we were long-term thinking. We were in INS for the long haul, because, like I say, some species such as the giant hogweed, you've got a 15-year seed source. So you miss one plant 1 year and you're in trouble. Again, it is mostly plant focused. We've been looking at Himalayan balsam, Japanese knotweed and giant hogweed on the 2 river catchments that I showed you on the map earlier. And our focus has been on surveys and control. And what we've been trying to do is find the source, whether it's on the main river or it's coming down from a tributary. That's been the ethos behind, is to work source downwards. So we've, in terms of practical action and the Tarry catchment, we've been controlling Japanese knotweed, giant hogweed and Himalayan balsam at Creesula Country Park. So we've been trying to get our own house in order as well. And in terms of Himalayan balsam, we thought we'd find the sources, 2 of them in Penakai, 1 in Cumgiad, and 1 in Cray Reservoir at the top of the catchment. And lo and behold, this year we found an even higher up source. So that just goes to show you've got to keep constant vigilance and monitoring so that you can get it from the top. But it's not rampant in the Tarry catchment like it is you know, further down in the main river catchment in the Usk Valley, for example. So we're really hoping to be on top of that if we can. Also in the Upper Tarry Valley, we've run a Japanese knotweed control grant. Japanese knotweed is slightly more of an issue, and particularly as you go down the South Wales valleys, if anyone who knows or lives there will know that there's Swansea is known as the knotweed capital for a very good reason. So we've been trying to start at the top of the catchment and push it out the national park, and then hopefully people further downstream will keep that momentum going. In winter work, we've done things like removing the dead knotweed stems so that we can access the new growth much better, and we've also done winter work such as rhododendron control, as we talked about earlier on Cribath. On the Usk catchment, we've been working on 3 hotspots in Brecon with people like Plan Brecon, Brecon Volunteer Bureau, etc. We've had a few staff balsam bashes as well. That was nice to have 60 national park staff out, entertaining. And then we've also been working in Crickhowell on Bullpit Meadows and Tear Ash with Langasset Woodland Group, looking at controlling the Himalayan balsam and the knotweed down there. And that's been, I think this is year 3, and the difference from the monoculture that was balsam taller than my head coming over the path from what used to be meadows to looking at it this year is astonishing what you can do in 2 years, because this is an annual plant, Himalayan balsam, so you can get it under control if you're vigilant enough to let no plant go to seed is the ultimate aim. And yeah, Langasset Woodlands Group and the National Park Wardens have been great in working with us down there. We've also last year, really proud to get stuff done during the year of COVID. We managed to get a grant from the Welsh Government Local Places for Nature Fund, and we did double bank control of Japanese knotweed for 11 kilometres around the town of Brecon, from west of Brecon at Llanspydded to east of Brecon at Llanhamlach. So I think we treated over 90 different sites or records of Japanese knotweed on there. So really pleased with that one, and we'll be following it up this year. And those are just a few of the headlines that we've have come up with through the project. Massive amounts of recording done, 61 kilometres of survey have enabled us to record 392 records of balsam and 152 records of Japanese knotweed. We've done lots of balsam bashes, including 16 community balsam bashes, and we hope to increase that even more this year. And we've worked with a phenomenal amount of landowners who have been 100% positive and behind us. So that's been really, really good to see. And we hope to keep the momentum up in 2021. Again, still tackling balsam and knotweed in the 2 river valleys, but we're all, the momentum is building now, and records do keep coming in from other parts of the national park. So it's good to see that our awareness raising is working in that respect. Oh, and yeah, this is just to say thank you to everyone who's worked on the project with us, from volunteer groups to big organisations to small organisations, but particularly to the volunteers. As you can see, the lovely Fran, making sure she got the very last piece of Himalayan balsam down there on Brecon Prom. So this year we're going to be working again in Brecon and its surrounding areas. We're also going to be working in Quick Howell to keep up the good work that's been done down there. We're going to be talking to people in the Talabont Valley to see if we can get some community engagement and action work parties down there. And we'll be looking at Creesula treatments on Menethylid, and we'll also be doing our winter work tackling things like Rhododendron and cherry laurel, and lots more awareness raising. And we want to train some volunteers up to help us with this project. So I suppose the key messages to take from this INS talk, I'd like you to take from the INS talk, is how big a threat they are. Particularly, like I said, particularly on islands. New Zealand is a great example of that. It's amazing flora and fauna evolved over the years. It was separated, and then lo and behold, the Brits come along and various other people and introduce things and absolutely decimate some very special native flora and fauna. Second thing I'd like you to take home is to think large scale and think long term. So it's great to clear an invasive species from your patch, but it's even better to take that work further upstream, downstream, however, wherever the next infestation may come from. So work with other people along catchments or in the areas that you need to. And thirdly is that everyone can do their bit. You can make sure to have good biosecurity practices. You can make good environmental choices when you're at the garden centre. You can record INS using the Alert Wales app. Oh, I don't know why my slide stopped then. And yes, if you want to help control it within your communities, please get in touch with me if you're a national park, or go through the GBN's website if you want to find a local action group that you can join wherever you are in the country. And that's it. I'm going to leave my contact details up there and the contact details for David German.